Preparations for Venezuela's forthcoming parliamentary elections continue. Palestinians protest against the normalization of relations between Israel and Bahrain. And 50 people are feared dead after a mine collapse in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Welcome to TeleSUR. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is from the South. Parliamentary elections are soon taking place in Venezuela. Due to the ongoing dialogue and reconciliation work between the government and opposition parties, the ballots will see the participation of a wide variety of candidates representing numerous viewpoints. Let's have a closer look at how these elections are coming together.
The National Electoral Council has made numerous modifications to December's ballots, including changes to the guidelines and the number of seats to be chosen.
We are developing an electoral schedule that answers to these new special norms. These norms are seeking to strengthen our political system and the balance that must at its core.
The number of seats in the National Assembly is being raised from 167 to 277, while maintaining the 87 electoral circuits for Venezuela's 24 states. Another change is how candidates are being elected, as 52% will be elected individually as representatives of a single-seat constituency, while the remaining 48% will be elected as part of a political party.
The opposition remains in a highly fragmented state. We are seeing that many political players are gonna take part, some in alliance with the government, some not. What this means is that, in the end, the National Assembly will prove to be much more politically diverse, representing a wider spectrum of political ideologies.
The modifications were agreed upon after talks between the ruling party and opposition sectors. They are also seeking to give prominence to newly established political movements that distance themselves from extremism.
The government is allowing for great participation, respecting our democracy. They are also trusting political organizations to accept the results and to work for their constituents.
The number of political parties taking part in these ballots has also increased to 107, and a new system to select indigenous lawmakers is also being established. Over 14,000 candidates have registered for these elections, as 90% of all active political parties are set to take part as well.
On Friday, the Venezuelan president announced the capture of a U.S. citizen in the state of Falcón who was allegedly spying and gathering information on state-owned facilities.
In the state of Falcón, a U.S. spy was caught gathering intel on the Amoay and Cardón refineries. We found all the proof, all videos and photos. The spy was a Marine who used to work in CIA bases in Iraq. He was found with heavy weaponry, specialized weapons. He was carrying large amounts of cash, as well as other supplies that are in the hands of the public ministry.
President Maduro also said this arrest is part of a plan to dismantle a terrorist attack against an oil refinery.
This capture comes just days after Oil Minister Tarek El Aissami, working along with scientific and engineering experts, discovered a plan to blow up the Palito refinery. I call attention to all refinery workers. We must reinforce all security measures.
Also in Venezuela, the head of the Strategic Operational Command of the Armed Forces has rejected statements by the U.S. Southern Command chief, who has accused Venezuela of promoting drug trafficking.
All this coincides with the visit 11 days ago of the chief of the U.S. Southern Command, who continually accuses Venezuela of drug trafficking. Totally false, because we, the Venezuelan military, we, the FANB, we, the Venezuelan state, the authorities, permanently fight against drug trafficking. And that Admiral Craig Fowler, what he does, it is disrespect Venezuelan military honor by creating so many lies. Of course, ordered with the help of his government and of the governments of the far right that are on the borders of Venezuela.
The Peruvian Congress approved a motion on Friday to begin impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra for moral incapacity. With 65 votes in favor, 36 against, and 24 abstentions, the Congress has officially accepted the motion stemming from accusations regarding the president's involvement in a corruption scandal. Members of Congress previously heard recordings of two private conversations between President Vizcarra and government officials about his meeting with Richard Cisneros, a singer who is being investigated for being fraudulently awarded government contracts.
Mr. President, the result of the votes is as follows: 111 votes in favor, 8 against, 8 abstentions. Congress members, 111 Congress members have voted in favor, 8 against, 8 abstentions. Consequently, the constitutional reform that incorporates Articles 34A and 39A in the political constitution regarding the impediment to run for office or to exercise public office has been approved.
The number of people who have died at the hands of the Colombian police during protests against police brutality has increased to 14. The protests have spread to several cities of the country and were sparked by the death of lawyer Javier Ordóñez, who was beaten and repeatedly tasered by police officers. On Friday, the Health Secretariat reported 3 new deaths. 2 of the victims were identified as a 40-year-old woman and a 17-year-old boy, while the third has not yet been identified. A group of lawyers mobilized in front of the Supreme Court of Justice in the Dominican Republic on Friday to demand the reopening of courts that have been closed since the beginning of the COVID-19 state of emergency. The lawyers called for in-person sessions in order to optimize their work. They said that virtual hearings must be agreed upon by the parties to obtain fair and adequate results. They stressed that other public institutions are open while trials continue behind closed doors. They said that they would continue to protest until their demands were addressed by the Supreme Court.
The reason for this visit is in principle so people realize we are not working. That's why we are here. We all have problems. We own rent for offices. Many of these people here have had to hand them over. At home, we do not have enough to provide for our children. We have not enrolled them in schools. Why is this the case? The courts are here for just one case. I have made many requests through digital channels, and I have not been given any answers. I go to the courts, and they don't let me in. So how can I solve this problem?
We're taking a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. A large number of industrial projects in Bolivia have come to a complete halt since last November's coup against President Evo Morales. There's more in this report.
The de facto Minister of Development Planning confirmed in a report to the lower house the stop of operations at an urea and fertilizer plant which had international contracts.
Due to the pandemic and the fall in oil prices, the price of urea fell internationally, and unfortunately, this plant used to produce most of the exports. What was left over is being sold in the local market.
The movement towards Socialism Party has warned that these industrial endeavors were paralyzed as part of a strategy to undermine the achievements made by the previous government.
We are seeing the urea, ammonia, and lithium industrial projects come to a complete halt. Energy and petrochemical projects have been stopped. We had a project ready to sell energy within our borders. It was all stopped. According to the de facto minister, these projects were held as they are not considered to be profitable.
The de facto government issued a decree 2 months ago saying that all state companies that are not profitable must be reformed.
We have reviewed Supreme Decree 4262, in particular Article 100, which states that institutions that do not generate profits will be reformed. In other words, they will be privatized.
Since November, these companies suspended all production and reportedly only have enough personnel on hand for the maintenance of the facilities.
We have come to the conclusion that losses from this shutdown reached $250 million. The country was already exporting urea and ammonia, and the lithium plants in the Uyuni salt flats were already working. So we have official figures that tell us how much was lost.
These industrial projects saw investments of hundreds of millions of dollars as part of a development plan to diversify Bolivia's sources of income, expanding from mining and natural gas exports.
Chileans took to the streets on Friday to pay tribute to the victims of the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship, but were met with heavy police repression. Police forcefully dispersed demonstrators who gathered at Santiago General Cemetery on the occasion of the 47th anniversary of the US-backed military coup against Chilean President Salvador Allende. Friday's repression against protesters comes weeks ahead of a referendum on whether to replace the current constitution, which was drafted during the dictatorship.
There is a past. There is also a time to honor those who were persecuted, executed, disappeared, and assassinated during the dictatorship. We understand that we have a historical obligation as before. We lost more than 400 comrades. Here at our headquarters, we have our memorial, where we remember their names, their families, their commitment. That is why we are also committed to the process of structural transformation, which is our duty, where the state must be a guarantor of social rights and not a subsidiary that concentrates profit in an abusive way.
The world's largest tropical wetland area, located in Brazil's Pantanal region, is continuing to be consumed by massive forest fires. Authorities have been unable to contain the fires, which have been spreading for weeks and have already consumed tens of thousands of acres. The fires reportedly started at the hands of local ranchers and farmers who for years have been clearing land for agriculture, cattle, farming, and logging practices. On top of this, drought conditions have only worsened the situation. Experts agree that this year, wildfires in the Amazon could set a new record for destruction in one of the most biodiverse areas in the world. The corruption case against Guyana's chief elections officer Keith Lowenfield has been adjourned to a later date. Lowenfield appeared before Georgetown's magistrate court on Friday, but the director of public prosecutions was a no-show. The trial is now set to begin on October 26, with the prosecution required to file all documents by October 9. Lowenfield is facing charges of misconduct in public office, conspiracy to commit a felony, and fraud for refusing to declare the results of the March 2nd polls using the recount figures. Meanwhile, a new charge of conspiracy to commit fraud was laid against Claremont Mingo, the returning officer for the largest voting district. Jamaicans are mourning the death of reggae singer Frederick Toots Hibbert from the iconic band Toots and the Maytals. Toots passed away at the University Hospital of the West Indies in St. Andrew on Friday evening. It is unclear how he died, but the 77-year-old was tested for COVID-19 in the last 2 weeks and was placed in intensive care. Toots is a 3-time winner of the Jamaica Festival Song Competition and was one of the 10 finalists for 2020. He is credited for popularizing reggae, even naming the rhythm with his 1968 single, Do the Reggae. Prime Minister Andrew Holness has offered condolences to his family, noting that the singer contributed significantly to brand Jamaica. We have more stories coming up. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. About 50 people are feared dead after a gold mine collapsed in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo following torrential rain. The accident in the makeshift mine occurred on Friday in the town of Kamituga in South Kivu province. According to witnesses, the mine caved in after a nearby river flooded. The town's mayor has decreed a 2-day mourning period and called on local residents to help extract the bodies from the ground. Civilian and military representatives in Mali met for a second round of talks on Friday in order to discuss a proposal to appoint a 2-year transitional government.
The military cannot make propositions. It is up to the sovereign people of Mali to make suggestions. My personal view and the suggestion from our govt region during these talks is to have a civil leader governing the transition.
Our group's attitude is civil. I would say that I would still be in favor of putting a vice presidential position in place and giving the vice presidency to the military. I think this is something that can be negotiated with ECOWAS for the simple reason that the divisions are very wide.
The main goal is to have a military leader in power. It's open for all to see that a third of Mali is occupied. If you look at the state of Mali, who can dare say to give power to a civilian? It will never work. It will never work. The country is at war. We want a military man, period.
Severe floods across West and Central Africa have affected more than 760,000 people. Senegal, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger are among the worst hit, with at least 111 people killed. This is according to the latest figures from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Floods are common during the rainy season, but in recent years, climate change, land degradation, and poor urban planning have led to more frequent disasters, as rapidly growing cities struggle with heavier than normal rainfall. At least 3 asylum seekers were arrested on Saturday following protests at the Moira refugee camp in the Greek island of Lesbos. Police heavily repressed the so-called freedom protests, which followed a fire that destroyed part of Europe's largest migrant camp this week. A number of women lost their consciousness due to tear gas used by authorities, and at least 1 man was evacuated by an ambulance after having a seizure. The asylum seekers have continuously demanded to be let out of the migrant camp, as dozens of COVID-19 cases were confirmed before the fire. The French Prime Minister addressed the COVID-19 situation in the country, calling on the population to learn to live with the coronavirus.
In 2 major cities, Marseille and Bordeaux, as well as in Guadeloupe, we are currently seeing a worrying evolution of contaminations, particularly among the elderly, as well as an elderly high rate of hospitalization, taking into account the forecasts that we can make at 3 weeks on the occupation of the intensive care beds. I have asked the Perfect Concern to propose to me by Monday, and after having carried out the necessary local consultations, a set of new complementary measures. Yes, the virus is here for a few more months, and we must learn to live with it without letting ourselves be drawn back into a logic of general lockdown.
And political figures commemorated the National Day of Catalonia on Friday. Let's listen to what they had to say.
From Catalonia, we must continue to claim that a political response to a political conflict is needed, and that this response cannot continue through repression and the judicialization of politics, and therefore we demand amnesty and the release of political prisoners and exiles, and to be able to exercise the right of self-determination, as is wanted by the people of Catalonia.
We are immersed in the health crisis and other crises derived from this COVID-19 crisis that add to the democratic crisis that this country is living and the political conflict that Catalonia is experiencing with the state. Today, for the 3rd consecutive year, it is the 3rd diada where there are exiled and political prisoners.
It's not a diada where there can be big demonstrations, there can be crowds, but it's a day that we can also turn into an opportunity to be with the people closest to us, to take care of ourselves, to get strength, because we live in a very difficult times, and obviously we can sort it out together, but in order to do that, we need to take care of each other.
Palestinian citizens in the occupied Gaza Strip protested against the recent normalization of ties between Israel and the Kingdom of Bahrain. Citizens gathered in central Gaza to burn the portraits of the Bahraini king, the U.S. president, and the Israeli prime minister. Palestinian officials have also criticized Bahrain over its decision to establish diplomatic relations with Israel, describing it as a betrayal to the Palestinian cause and supporting decades of illegal occupation. The deal brokered by the U.S. president has been seen mainly by Palestine as a catalyst that will further encourage Israel to continue its efforts to annex Palestinian lands.
If Bahrain and the Emirates thought it's in their national interest to replace Palestinian ambassadors with Israeli ambassadors, they're going to do it. But to what benefit? Who's going to benefit? I think this region is being pushed further and further towards the hands of extremism, violence, and counter-violence. This is not peacemaking. This is electioneering, campaign electioneering for Trump and Netanyahu, and unfortunately they're using the Arabs for this purpose.
And a member of the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization has said the organization believes more Arab countries are ready to create an imaginary peace with Israel.
The United States and Israel seek to establish relations with peripheral countries that have no direct relationship with the Israeli occupation in order to promote the idea of regional peace as an alternative to Palestinian-Israeli peace. There's a change in Arab priorities. This change replaces Israel as a threat to Arab national security with another enemy, which is Iran. And this means abandoning the obligations towards the Palestinian cause.
A runoff election for the remaining parliamentary seats was held in 9 Iranian provinces on Friday after a 5-month delay due to the pandemic. The Interior Minister said the elections were held in full compliance with health protocols in order to guarantee the safety of both voters and electoral officials. The first round of elections was held in February and the second was due to be held on April 17th, but was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Parliamentary elections in the capital, Tehran, and 2 other cities will be held next year, alongside presidential and city council elections. And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find these and more stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow health protocols where you are and stay safe. For TeleSUR English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.